Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Empty Cloud Monastery. So my name is Bhante Suddhaso, and this evening we'll be looking at a discourse from the Majjhima Nikaya, number 28, which is the simile of the elephant's footprint. So we'll start by paying homage to the Buddha, and then I'll read a bit from this sutta and talk about its meaning. And you're welcome at any time to type in questions. And I'll take questions after I'm done with the explanation of the sutta. So we can start with homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So as mentioned, we'll be looking at the Mahahati Padopama Sutta, which is the discourse on the simile the elephant's footprint. And there are two such discourses, the Chula and the Maha. So the lesser discourse on the simile of the elephant's footprint and the greater simile. And this is the Maha, so the greater simile on the discourse of the elephant's, a greater discourse on the simile of the elephant's footprint. So one of the more well-known similes that the Buddha used. So the discourse takes place at Savatthi. And this particular one is given by Sariputta. And I've noticed in the past that although there's only a handful of discourses attributed to Venerable Sariputta, they tend to be some of my favorites. I tend to really like these particular discourses. So Sariputta was, as many of you probably know, Sariputta was one of the Buddha's two main male disciples. So the Buddha had 4 primary disciples, 2 male and 2 female. Most people are familiar with Venerable Sariputta and Venerable Mahamoggallana, who were the 2 chief male disciples, chief bhikkhu disciples. And then the 2 chief bhikkhuni disciples were Venerable Khema and Venerable Uppalavanna. So this particular discourse is by Venerable Sariputta. And this is as mentioned from the Majjhima Nikaya. So the discourse begins with Sariputta saying to the monks who are gathered there, he says, just as the footprint of any jungle animal can fit inside an elephant's footprint, and the elephant's footprint is considered the best of them on account of its large size, in the same way, all wholesome teachings are included in the 4 Noble Truths. So the term wholesome teachings here is kusala dhamma. And just to talk a bit about that, so the word kusala, it's commonly translated as wholesome, though you'll sometimes see it translated as skillful. But in that case, it needs to be understood that skillful here means skillful in terms of making progress on the path to awakening. So it doesn't mean skillful in the ordinary sense that you might say someone is a skillful hunter or a skillful liar or something like that. But the term kusala means skillful in the development of wholesome traits of mind, the development in the morally good qualities that lead to awakening. And the term Dhamma, we most commonly use the word Dhamma to mean teachings, and most often in a Buddhist context to mean specifically Buddhist teachings. But the term Dhamma also has a broader meaning here. So it can mean teachings, but it can also have a broader sense of phenomena as a whole. So any distinct object or characteristic or thing can be called a Dhamma. So the term kusala dhamma then can mean wholesome teachings, teachings which are relevant to attaining awakening, which are helpful for developing good karma. It can also mean wholesome things in general, wholesome phenomena in general. So in this context, since he's talking about the Four Noble Truths, which is a set of teachings, then it's reasonable to take Dhamma here as meaning teachings. So Kusala Dhamma as meaning wholesome teachings, teachings which are morally good and which are connected with the Buddhist path of awakening. But it could also be taken in a broader sense of saying all good things are included within the Four Noble Truths. But the most likely meaning here is again, all good teachings, all wholesome teachings can be included in the Four Noble Truths. So this is basically saying that not only all of the Buddhist teachings are included in the Four Noble Truths, but actually everything which is morally good and morally right in all bodies of instruction, all bodies of spiritual instruction, can in some way be included within the Four Noble Truths. So this is really emphasizing the central importance and value of the Four Noble Truths and the importance of coming to understand them. And it's also indicating their all-inclusiveness. So, and Sariputta then goes into an explanation of the Four Noble Truths. So he says, what are the Four Noble Truths? So the first one is Dukkha Arya Satya, so the Noble Truth of Dukkha. And so what is Dukkha? Well, in a moment, Venerable Sariputta is going to actually describe each of these terms. So first I'll just list them and then we'll start going through his explanations. So Dukkha Arya Satya, the Noble Truth of Dukkha, of unsatisfactoriness, the inherently unsatisfactory nature of all things. Second is Dukkha Samudaya Arya Satya, so the Noble Truth of the Samudaya. Samudaya means the arising or the manifestation, the appearance, the coming into being of dukkha. So what is it that causes dukkha to happen? Why is it that we experience discontent, dissatisfaction, discomfort? The third one is dukkha nirodha arya satya. So then this is the noble truth of the ending of dukkha. So what is it that causes our dukkha to diminish or disappear, even if just for a moment? What choices can we make that will lead to the disappearance of dukkha? And even just that statement of dukkha nirodha is already a very important statement because it's indicating the fact that there is a possibility of overcoming our suffering, of eliminating our discontent, the possibility of cultivating a genuine unconditional joy. So dukkha nirodha arya satya, even before we know how to come to the elimination of dukkha, just knowing that it's possible is already a tremendous solace for the mind. And ideally, it also gives us the inspiration to commit ourselves to Buddhist practice. And the fourth noble truth is dukkha nirodha gamaniya patipada, which is the path of practice which leads to the elimination of dukkha. So this is the noble truth of how to practice, like what to do with our self-training, our self-development, so that we can eventually eliminate our discomfort, our discontent. So then Sariputta launches into a definition of these terms. So the first one, he says, Katamanchavaso dukkhaṃ arya satyam. So what is the noble truth of dukkha? And he says, Jatipi dukkha. So birth is dukkha. Birth is unsatisfying. It's uncomfortable. It's painful. Jarapi dukkha. Jara means decay, decrepitude. So the process of withering and fading that happens as we get older and older. So that's also dukkha. It's uncomfortable. It's painful. It's unsatisfying. It's uncomfortable. He says maranampi dukkham. So dying is also dukkha. And something I find interesting here, by the way, is that the word marana, which is commonly translated simply as death, the word marana is actually a present participle verb. So it means dying. So death can be understood as being a single moment, a single instant, where one life ends and another life begins. But dying, on the other hand, is the extended process of a life coming to its end. And this can be quite drawn out. So especially if somebody has a terminal illness, they might go through the process of dying over the course of days, weeks, months, even years. And that entire process naturally tends to be extraordinarily uncomfortable, unpleasant, unsatisfying. Therefore, it's dukkha. And Sariputta continues, Sokapari deva dukkha domana supaya sapi dukkha. So he says also, sorrow, anguish, pain, depression, and despair, these are all dukkha. So this is just different uncomfortable mind states, which we can experience during the course of our life. When we experience loss, or we don't get what we like, or we encounter unpleasant situations, or the death of relatives, or things of that sort, then we're likely to experience these various uncomfortable mind states, such as sorrow and depression and despair and so on. And so naturally, that's all pretty uncomfortable. And he continues, he says, Yam pichang nalabati tampi dukkang. He says, also not getting what one wants is dukkha. So this, I think we can understand when you want something and you don't get it. So just look at, say, a small child who really, really wants something and they don't get it. And they might throw a tantrum or have a fit. But actually, we're not so different. No matter how old we are, we still tend to be disappointed when we don't get what we want. We experience some mental discomfort, some dukkha. And he says, Sankatena panchupadana kanda dukkha. So he says, briefly speaking, the 5 components of body and mind, so the panchakanda, the 5 components of body and mind, when grasping is present, upadana, so when there's any kind of grasping, clinging, attachment, desire in relationship to any aspect of our body and mind, then we experience dukkha. That produces discomfort and dissatisfaction. So there's already a little bit of a hint here about what's the cause of our suffering. It's that desire and attachment in relationship to any aspect of our body and mind. And so then he then explains, he says, so then what are the 5 components when affected by clinging? In the panchupadana kanda. The 5 components of body and mind when affected by clinging. He says, rupa upadana kando, so rupa is our physical body, vedana, which is the experience of painful sensation, pleasant sensation, or neutral sensation. So vedana is sensation. Sanya upadana kando, sanya is the identification or recognition process of the mind. So the process by which we identify and label our experiences. Sankhara is the 4th of the khandas. This is our mental activities, which again is our thoughts, our memories, our mental processes. And finally, vijnana, which is consciousness, and in particular sensory consciousness. So the field of awareness that we have. And so these are the 5 components of being, which in and of themselves are not problematic. They're just an aspect of reality. But when clinging or grasping is present, so upadana, when upadana is present, then these 5 components become painful. They become dukkha. So the panchakanda themselves are not dukkha. They're just part of reality. But when there is grasping present, then they become dukkha. They become unpleasant, unsatisfying, uncomfortable. So then Sariputta goes through explanation of the contemplation of the elements in relationship to the body. And this is one of the interesting things about this discourse, and that, again, I think this is focused on the 4 Noble Truths. But one thing he's doing here is he's getting us to look more deeply at what our actual experience is. So he goes into the analysis of the four elements. So he's saying, so what is this physical body? And he says, well, it's composed of the four great elements. And what are the four great elements? It's earth, water, heat, and wind. So this in Pāli is Patavi, earth, Apo, water, Tejo. So Tejo literally means heat, but you'll also see this translated as fire. And Vaya. So Vaya means wind, but you'll also see it translated as air. So earth, water, fire, and air, or earth, water, heat, and wind, depending on the translation. So this is talking about four ways that we experience our body, four ways that we relate to physicality. And so then Sariputta starts going through a way of starting to analyze this. So paying attention to our experience. So what is the earth element of the body? And so he says the earth element can be internal or external. So first indicating that the experience of physicality, of earth-like physicality outside our body. So inside our body, he then goes through a list of different solid or weighty physical components. So he says any internal personal component that is experienced as hard or solid, such as head hair, body hair, nails, teeth, skin, muscles, tendons, bones, bone marrow, kidney, heart, liver, membrane, spleen, lungs, colon, intestine, stomach, feces, or any other internal personal component experienced as hard or solid. So paying attention then to the hard or solid aspects of our own body. This is what we mean by earth element. So it's the experience of hardness, the experience of solidity. And one can see that what's outside our body, that's hard or solid, is actually pretty much the same as what's inside our body. And that's the next contemplation that he gives. He says, whether earth element is internal or external, it is the same earth element. In other words, if you look at a stone or a tree or a pile of dirt or a carpet or a wall or anything like that, then you can recognize that's made up of the same kind of physical matter as this body. This body is not different from that external solid object. It's made up of exactly the same stuff. And because it's made up of exactly the same stuff, then Sariputta continues, it should be accurately seen with right wisdom in this way. This is not mine, I am not this is not myself. In other words, it's recognizing that these solid components of our body are just a part of nature. They're not something which is permanently me or mine, but they're just part of nature. So just as when you say if you have a loaf of bread, you can see the loaf of bread and recognize, oh, that's external earth element. Then you eat the bread, and now it becomes internal earth element. And a few hours later, you go to the toilet and defecate, and now once again, there is external earth element. But you can see that all along, it was just part of nature. And to continue the cycle, then that feces then mixes back with the soil, and that soil, people plant wheat, and the wheat grows up, and people harvest the wheat and bake bread, and then you have another loaf of bread to eat. So there's this clear cycle. It's just earth element changing places. But it's always just the same earth element, and it's always not me and not mine. So this is an intellectual way of talking about the earth element, but the important thing is to see it in this way. So to actually pay attention to our body as just being composed of exactly the same earth element as everything outside of the body. And just as everything outside of the body is clearly not me and not mine, then also the earth element inside the body is also not me and not mine. And so Sariputta continues, he says, when one has accurately seen it with right wisdom in this way, one becomes disenchanted with the earth element, and the mind becomes dispassionate towards the earth element. So again, this is the cultivation of disenchantment and dispassion, which in Pāli are nibbida and viraga. And this is very important because in several places in the suttas, the Buddha identifies these two mind states as being the immediate precursors to full awakening. So nibbindang virajati, viraga vimochati. So from disenchantment, there is dispassion, and from dispassion, there is liberation. So cultivating disenchantment and dispassion towards the earth element of our own body is a major step towards awakening. And the process that Venerable Sariputta is describing here is one way of doing that. Then he carries on from there. So he says, there's a time when the external earth element is disturbed. At that time, the external earth element disappears. Even the vastness of the external earth element will be seen as impermanent, as subject to elimination, disappearance, and alteration. How then could one say of this ephemeral, craving-born body, this is me, or this is mine, or I am this? Those concepts do not apply here. So here Venerable Sariputta, he's then pointing to the fact that when we look at all of the physical objects outside of us, then we can clearly see that all of them are subject to decay, they're subject to disappearance, they're subject to destruction. And the same is exactly true for this body. For the solid components of this body, they have exactly the same nature of being subject to alteration, destruction, and disappearance. So then, that being so, how can we possibly think that this is who we are, that this is what I am? When we recognize that this body is just as fleeting as and ephemeral, as impermanent as anything else. And he continues. Next, he gives a practice for how to relate to unpleasant statements from other people. So he says, Venerables, if they disparage, demean, deprecate, or deride a monk, in other words, if other people say nasty things to you or about you, one understands it in this way. What has arisen for me is an unpleasant feeling produced by ear contact. So this is interesting. Somebody's insulting you, and instead of getting caught up in what they're saying, you just think, this is an unpleasant feeling produced by ear contact. Really takes the sting out of it. It's really cutting it down to the basics. What's actually going on? Oh, we're just hearing something with the ear that we're identifying as unpleasant. That's all. You drop the story and it becomes something very basic. And he continues, one thinks, it has a basis, it is not without a basis. What is its basis? Sense contact is its basis. So in other words, why are we having an unpleasant experience based upon hearing something? Because we're having a sensory experience. It's just natural that when you have sensory experience, that sometimes it will be unpleasant. And he continues, he says, one sees sense contact is impermanent. Feeling is impermanent. Identification is impermanent. Mental activities are impermanent. Consciousness is impermanent. In other words, you're saying that these 5 components of being, so rupa, which here is your senses, because in order to hear something, you hear it physically. So body is impermanent, rupa is impermanent, then Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, Vijnana. So all 5 components of our being are impermanent. They're constantly changing, they're ephemeral, they're insubstantial. That being so, there's no reason to be bothered by any of it. And so then Sariputta says, one places, settles, stabilizes, and resolves one's mind on that elemental foundation. In other words, by recognizing the body as just being made up of impersonal natural components, which are ephemeral, insubstantial, not me, not mine, not worth clinging to, then one has a basis for a very powerful form of equanimity. An equanimity which recognizes everything as just being the interplay of natural components. Nothing personal involved here at all. And therefore, since nothing is personal, then we don't need to take any of it personally. And therefore, it doesn't bother us because none of it is personal. So there's no need to be upset by anything that's said or done to us. And Sariputta even goes on to say, even if others assail that monk in an unwanted, undesirable, unpleasing way, such as hitting them with fists, stones, sticks, or knives, so even if other people are physically attacking your body, then one can apply these contemplations. So recognizing that the body is not me and not mine. And in fact, he makes a reference to the simile of the saw. So the Kakachupama Sutta, which is another very famous discourse, in which the Buddha says, even if criminals cut off your limbs with a two-handled saw, if you produce hostility in your mind, you are not following my instructions. So this is a statement that the Buddha made in order to remind us that under even the most extreme situations, we always have the capacity to maintain a peaceful mind. We always have the capacity to keep a pure mind, a mind free of hostility. And so Sariputta here is also pointing out that by using this contemplation of the elements, by seeing the body as just composed of natural components, then you'll also recognize that when other people are attacking your body, they're just attacking natural components, like attacking the stones, attacking the dirt. So it's not personal. It's just attacking natural components. They're not attacking you because there is no you here to be attacked. There's just earth element. And then he gives the next example here. He says, when that monk, so this is referring again to the monk who's being insulted or attacked, says, when that monk recollects the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha in this way, if equanimity based on wholesomeness does not become established in him, so this is the case where one is in a very uncomfortable or painful situation, and one is trying to cultivate equanimity in this way, but it's not working. He says, then one thinks to oneself, it is misfortune for me, it is unfortunate for me, it is bad fortune for me, it is not good fortune for me. So saying, this is really, really unlucky, really bad luck. That when I recollect the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha in this way, equanimity based on wholesomeness does not become established in me. So it's just reminding yourself, like, okay, I really need to make an effort to remember the Buddha's teachings and to practice equanimity accordingly, even in the most painful and difficult circumstances. And then Venerable Sariputta goes on to give a similar explanation of the other three elements, physical elements. So the water element. So again, in the same way, we pay attention to the internal experience of liquidity or moisture. So the feeling of wetness in the body. And he gives examples such as bile, phlegm, pus, blood, sweat, fat, tears, oil, saliva, mucus, urine, and so on. So paying attention to the liquid aspect of the body. And similarly to the earth element, we recognize that it's not different from the water aspect outside the body. It's exactly the same components, physical components, and constantly coming in and out of the body. So for example, when we drink water, then we're adding earth element to the body. And when we urinate, we're removing water element from the body. So adding water element to the body, and then a little while later, removing water element from the body. So we can see that all along, it's just been a natural component, not our true nature, not who we really are, but just a natural component changing position. And so just as that earth element can be seen as a natural component, which is insubstantial, ephemeral, subject to alteration and destruction, and ultimately impersonal, in the same way, the water component of the body is exactly the same. And he goes on also then to the fire element, to the heat element. So we pay attention to the experience of heat and warmth within the body, and recognize that it's exactly the same as the heat or warmth outside the body. Again, just a natural component, just an aspect of nature. What, like the other elements, is impermanent, insubstantial, subject to change, subject to dissipation, and ultimately not our true nature. And then finally, the air element or the wind element. Again, one practices in the same way. And again, this is a way in which one can cultivate equanimity towards anything related to the body, recognizing that the body is just these four natural components, these four aspects of nature, and therefore we don't need to be bothered by it. Just as if there's wind blowing through the leaves of a tree, well, then we see that's all it is. So we can relate to this body in exactly the same way. It's just an aspect of nature. It's nothing personal. Then Venerable Sariputta carries on into an analysis of sensory consciousness. And this is actually fairly long and detailed. But briefly speaking, first off, he gives a little summary of what we call the body. He says, just as when space is encompassed by wood, rope, thatch, and clay, it is called a house. In the same way, when space is encompassed by bones, sinews, muscles, and skin, it is called a body. So this is a very cute way of talking about a body. It's just made up of a bunch of separate components which are cobbled together, and we call it a body. Just muscle and blood and bones wrapped around a bit of space. We call it a body. Just like a tree, just like a house is just some wood and stones and so on wrapped around some space, and we call it a house. In the same way, we call this a body. And then he talks about how when there's an eye and there's something to see, then we have the experience of eye consciousness, and so on. And so then the next contemplation he gives is as one pays attention to these components of body and mind. So recognizing the body and recognizing that based upon the body, there is sensory experience, which produces sensations, which we then identify and label, and which we then think and ponder about and are aware of. So the arising of all five components of being in this way. One then says, he says, one understands in this way. It seems there is this collection and combination of these five components subject to grasping. And this was said by the Buddha. One who sees paticca samuppada sees the Dhamma. One who sees the Dhamma sees paticca samuppada. And these five components subject to grasping are dependently co-arisen. So in other words, it's seeing the body as a set of conditional phenomena which arise and cease based upon conditions. So not relating to the body as something permanent or stable, not relating to the mind as something permanent or stable, but rather as a constantly changing temporary experience dependent upon conditions. And Sariputta continues, he says, interest, attachment, affection, and adherence in relation to these five components is the arising of dissatisfaction. It's the source of dukkha, so dukkha samudaya. So here Sariputta is finally getting into describing the second noble truth. So here he's giving what the basis for it is. Let me just find the Pāli here. Yeah, so Chanda Raga Vinyo, So Chanda, Alaya, Anunaya, Ajosana. So these are these four terms that are used here. Interest, attachment, affection, and adherence. So this is all talking about the process of desire and attachment in relation to any aspect of body and mind. So that ultimately is the cause of our dukkha. It's the reason why we experience discomfort and dissatisfaction. It's because of some kind of desire or attachment related to any aspect of body and mind. And one recognizes that the elimination of that interest and passion and obsession, that craving in relationship to body and mind, is ultimately what leads to the elimination of our suffering. So here then, Venerable Sariputta is talking about the third noble truth. So the elimination of dukkha through recognizing the desire and attachment that we have in relationship to the components of body and mind, and working on letting go of that, on relinquishing that desire and attachment. And he goes through the same analysis with each of the six senses. So each of the six sensory fields as being a basis for investigating exactly the same process. the process by which we experience sensations through the body, and we react mentally to those sensations through the process of sanya and sankara, so identification and mental activity. And therefore we produce an experience of discomfort or dissatisfaction because of our desires in relationship to our experiences. But that if we can relinquish those desires and see things as impermanent and insubstantial and ultimately impersonal, then there will be no suffering in relationship to any of it. And this is actually the direct path to awakening. This cultivation of the recognition of impermanence and of the impersonal nature of all phenomena. So this is a brief overview of Majjhima Nikaya 28, the Mahahatipadopama Sutta. So at this time we can respect the sutta with 3 sadhus, and then I'll take any questions you might have. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Okay, so now I'll have a look at the questions. First off, hello to all the people who have checked in online. So hello to Rick, Karuna, Maria, Manal, Mary, Jay, Kumu, Bhumika, Pili, Philip, Jayanta, Saw, Anthony, Jeff, Faze, and Haiyang. Hello to all of you. And there's a few questions I see so far. So first off, Philip says, I've also heard kusala explained as healthy. Do you agree with that? I mean, yes, as long as it's further clarified. So when we talk about healthy here, we mean healthy in the sense of spiritually healthy, morally good, morally healthy. So I've seen it translated that way in other languages besides English. I've seen words used which basically mean healthy in English. I've seen that used to refer to the word kusala. So yeah, healthy in the sense of morally healthy or spiritually healthy. So yeah, and I think it's okay. It just requires a little bit of explanation that when we say healthy, we specifically mean spiritually healthy, morally good. Then Faiza says, if everything happens to our body, we can say it is not me or mine. How about self-defense? Well, be practical. So we do have the aspiration of harmlessness, the aspiration of not hurting any sentient being. But there's also the recognition that we need to take care of our body because our body is an important tool for our practice. It's an important support for our spiritual practice. So if somebody is attacking our body, well, then ideally, we should run away, try to get to safety. And if we can get to safety without hurting our attacker, then that's ideal. But if we're in a situation where we feel the only way to get to safety is through harming our attacker, well, that's not ideal. But if you really feel that's the situation, then you should be striving to cause as little injury as possible, as little harm as possible. And ideally, try to find a way of escape that doesn't involve causing harm at all. But if you do really feel that your only option is to do something which hurts your attacker, then try to cause as little injury as possible, as little damage as possible. And Kumu says, in differentiating between dispassion/disenchantment and aversion, aversion has the emotion of anger in it, a chitta with anger, and the former two are with equanimity. Is this correct? Yes. Yes. So aversion is where you hate something, whereas disenchantment, nibbida, nibbida literally means not seeking. So you're not seeking satisfaction in an experience. You're not seeking pleasure. So you see it for what it is. You just don't seek pleasure from it. You don't seek satisfaction from it. You just recognize it as a temporary experience and something which is not capable of captivating the mind because you see its limitations. That's disenchantment. In dispassion, then, is when, based upon that disenchantment, you let go of your desire and attachment in relationship to an experience. So disenchantment is when you recognize that an experience is incapable of bringing true happiness, true joy, true peace of mind. So then that leads to dispassion, where you no longer have the craving. So the word viraga more literally means to be without lust. So you no longer have any lust for an experience because you've seen that it's ultimately unsatisfying. So this is different from aversion. Aversion is where you hate something and you want to push it away. You want to get rid of it or avoid it. Whereas with disenchantment and dispassion, you're just seeing it for what it is. So you're not interested in getting involved. It's a different state of mind. It's a peaceful state of mind. So the state of mind of aversion is agitated and uncomfortable, whereas the state of mind of disenchantment and dispassion is one that's peaceful, serene, unbothered, undisturbed, subtly joyful. And Hai Eng says, do we gain a sudden awakening or enlightenment when attachment, aversion, and delusion disappear? Yes, you do. Yeah. But it also develops gradually over time. So as you work on reducing your attachment, aversion, and delusion, then you will also experience gradually increasing happiness, serenity, and clarity of mind. So it's both gradual and also sudden. And Hasanta says, I was fascinated to hear about the two chief female disciples. I knew Venerable Kema, but not familiar with the other Venerable. Could you discuss that one day? Plus suttas I can read to find out more. Yes, so Venerable Kema Bhikkhuni and Venerable Upalavanna Bhikkhuni, they are mentioned in a handful of places in the suttas, but the place where you find the most is in the Therigatha. So the Therigatha has a lot of really delightful teachings from the Arhat Bhikkhunis. But yeah, it is unfortunate that in the suttas there's a lot about Sariputta, a little bit about Mahamoggallana, but very little about Venerable Kema and Venerable Upalavanna. We just don't have much about them in the suttas, which is probably originally there were suttas related to them, but most of it has been lost. One thing that's important to keep in mind, by the way, is that the Pāli Canon as we have it nowadays is probably much shorter than it was 2,500 years ago. So according to the commentaries, that we're missing about 75% of the suttas. Some of that might have had more material related to the two chief Bhikkhuni disciples, but we don't know. It's lost in time. There's more in the Agamas, so the Chinese parallel to the Pāli Canon. There's more material related to the Bhikkhunis, but still there's not a huge amount. There's also, if you go through the Samyutta Nikaya, there's a few here and there, and there's a few scattered around. And Hai Eng says, how can attachment to rites and rituals affect our spiritual practice? It's not really related at all to this sutta, so it's a good question, but I recommend you bring it to Monk Chat on Friday evening. That's the time for all manner of off-topic questions. And that's the last question related to this discourse. So if there's no other questions, we can go ahead and conclude at this time with 3 more sadhus, and we'll see you for our next session tomorrow morning. So we'll end it this time. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll see you next time.